There's been a lot of hype around the Hoka Mach X, probably because the Mach series has been so popular. But how does the Mach X actually perform? And do the Pebax plate and PEBA foam make any difference? Let's get into it. Guys, welcome back to the channel. This is my review of Hoka's Mach X. Now, before we get started, Hoka was good enough to send me this shoe for the purpose of review. However, they're not paying me, and they're not going to get a chance to see this review before you do. First of all, clearly, it is a very good looking shoe. It's a little understated compared with some of Hoka's other shoes, but still, the colorways that they have come out with for the Mach X are pretty good looking, in my opinion, of course. Now, the Hoka Mach X will cost you $180. I will place a link to it from Roadrunner Sports in the show notes below. And look, I get it, $180, it's not cheap, but I think this shoe will tick a lot of boxes for a lot of you. Now, Hoka claims that a US men's size 10 will tip the scale at 9.4 ounces or 266 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 12.5, it tips the scale at 11 ounces even, which is about 312 grams. So certainly not the heaviest shoe that I have run with, but this shoe is marketed as kind of like an up-tempo trainer, which can almost double as a race day shoe. And I think it does work very well for the former, not so much for the latter. Now, you can immediately see we do have a big chunk of midsole right here, and we'll get more into the midsole composition in just a second. But the men's version has 42 millimeters in the heel, 37 millimeters in the forefoot for a 5 millimeter drop. The women's version of the Mach X has 37 millimeters in the heel, 32 millimeters in the forefoot, also for a 5 millimeter drop. This is clearly a road running shoe. It is a neutral shoe, and it does fit true to size. All right, let's start at the top. Let's work our way down. Look at this heel collar. We got lots of padding, which is a lot less like a race day shoe and a lot more like a daily trainer or an up-tempo daily trainer. We've just got this padding to make sure the work that we're putting into it is comfortable while we're doing it. The heel counter is super rigid. There is no pushing that down. And certainly I did get a good heel lockdown in this shoe. No slippage. The upper is a lovely Creole jacquard mesh. And when I'm feeling it, when I put my hand in and I try and touch both sides at the same time, it seems like it is a single layer mesh. When you look at it, it's almost like there are two layers that have been sandwiched together or stuck together. So I can't separate them in my hand, so effectively it is a single layer mesh, but it looks like we've got two meshes stuck together. Now, if you look at the toe box of the shoe, you can see there is quite a few air holes in there, and I had no problem with the breathability of this shoe. I am testing this shoe during summertime in Florida, so every run I go on is extremely hot. And honestly, at this time of year, it's very tricky for me to determine how breathable a shoe is, just because every single shoe that I wear gets soaked every time I take it out. But my feet didn't feel overly hot in this shoe when I was taking it out for my runs, even when I was picking up the pace and putting in a bit of effort. Hoka's included very minimal overlays on the Mach X. Obviously, we have the branding right here on the lateral side. On the medial side, we have the Hoka logo here. And then coming around, you'll see these lines coming around the shoe. And these aren't so much overlays as they are more of a tighter weave of the upper. And then we've got a little bit of structure, a little underlay coming around the toe box just to make sure that upper stays off your foot. And then, of course, right along the eyelet chain, which we're always going to have just to give a little support when you cinch down the laces. I usually don't say much about the laces, but in this case, the laces have been my favorite part of the shoe. And what I mean by that is the laces, they don't really mean anything, right? You want them to do their job, and it doesn't really matter how they do it. But I really like the feel of these laces. They're a linguine shape, but they have a rough texture to them. And that rough texture just gives me a sense of security when I'm tying them on my foot. Now, I always double up my laces. I'm not taking any chances with the laces coming undone when I go out. But it just seemed that when I tied these shoes, when I cinched them down, double knotted these laces, the roughness of the laces just gave me a sense of security that there is no possible way they're coming undone. It's a very small thing, I know. It's a silly thing. I also know that. But the laces didn't come undone. I mean, really, the laces don't come undone on any of my shoes. But what I'm saying is I just like how they feel. Give me a sense of security, you know? The tongue is absolutely gorgeous. We don't have a lace loop in the middle, but it is gusseted on both sides. And the tongue is super thin. The tongue is probably the most race-like part of the Mach X. It's very thin on top, kind of like a suede material. But the Mach X are vegan, so it's some kind of faux suede. We do have an area of padding right down the middle, so when you cinch down the laces, you're not going to get any lace bite across the top of your foot. And then on the sides, before it actually goes into the gusseted part of the tongue, we have a very wide mesh, just contributing to a nice breathability of the Mach X. The sock liner is removable, comes right out, nice and thin. I usually take this out daily just so I can let the shoes dry quicker. Take this out, lay it out, stuff this part with newspaper, and I'm good to go in a couple hours. Now let's come down to the midsole, because this is what you've been waiting to hear about. Now, Hoka is fairly new to the PEBA game. They've used EVA over the years in most of their shoes. But we do have a layer of PEBA in the Mach X, and you can see it's very difficult to see because on my colorway, both foams are white-ish, kind of cream white, but the top layer is PEBA, and that PEBA foam is going to give you a nice soft kind of responsive feel, but the PEBA is sitting on a base of EVA foam. We can see the EVA is quite thin here at the bottom, but it does come up here towards the heel, and it's just giving a nice carriage to the shoe. Like that EVA is giving the whole shoe a bit of support. Now, I know a lot of you out there, you don't think much of EVA, but I think there is still a place for it, and I'll get to my conclusions at the end of this, what I'd like to see Hoka do with maybe the Mach X2. But for this shoe, I think this combo actually works quite well. Now, you heard me, PEBA on top, EVA on the bottom, sandwiched in between the PEBA foam and the EVA foam is a Pebax plate. You can get a glimpse of it right here on the bottom. So yes, this is a plated shoe. If you're not a fan of plated shoes, and I am for the most part, but there are times when I really don't want to run in a plated shoe, I tend to get a little bit of plate fatigue. You are the people I'm speaking to right now, because this plate is not as rigid as you may have experienced in other shoes. I've been testing this shoe for quite a while. I haven't once experienced any plate fatigue, and that's because the Pebax plate in the Mach X is not very rigid. In fact, look, I can bend this up right like that. In fact, if I reach down here and I grab my pair of Mach 5s, it feels like they have very similar flexibility. It's just as easy for me to bend a Mach 5 as it is the Mach X. And obviously there is no plate in the Mach 5. Now, I bring up the flexibility and how flexible it is because I don't want you to be scared off if you're trying to get away from a plated shoe. What I found with the Pebax plate in the Hoka Mach X is that it really gives a little support to the midsole when you're running easy. And then when it comes time to pick up the pace, like this shoe is marketed for, remember it's an up-tempo trainer leaning towards race day, that's when you get the benefits of a little bit of additional push from the plate. But I would say that the plate doesn't actually give me push. It's like I don't feel like I am running away with myself when I'm wearing this shoe. It doesn't feel out of control the way some other race day shoes feel. I'm gonna say that better. When I'm running in the Mach X, I don't feel like it's a race day shoe. I don't feel like the shoe is propelling me forward any faster than I'm running anyway. Does that make sense? What I think the plate contributes to the Mach X is a very controlled ride. And with that control and that little bit of rigidity that you have with the plate comes a feeling of just a little bit more comfort when you start picking up the pace. And that's where I think the beauty of the Mach X really lies, is that when you're running easy, you don't feel like you have to do something extra in order to get the most out of the shoe. You can run easy in the shoe and you're probably not even going to notice that there is a plate in it. But then when you start to pick up the pace, you start to run at the paces or the effort level that this shoe is kind of designed for. It just feels a little more effortless without feeling like you're cheating, like some of these super shoes actually make you feel like. Now, because we've got this big chunk of midsole with PEBA and EVA, and of course the plate running through, there is a big disconnect from the road. There isn't a lot of road feel with the Hoka Mach X. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. It really depends on what you want. I know Hoka designs this shoe to be an up-tempo trainer, and of course the marketing says that it could be used for race day, but there are way too many race day options out there for you to consider using the Mach X for your race day shoe, unless you just wanted one shoe, and in which case the Mach X is a pretty good option for you. Just look at the outsole of this shoe. Look how much rubber we have here on the forefoot. We've got quite a bit here on the heel. I'm looking at this corner, this lateral heel area where I tend to heel strike. Yeah, I've got a little bit of wear. I probably put about 40 miles in this before I sat down to make this review. And yeah, I can see a little bit of wear, but there is quite a bit of outsole rubber here on the heel, and on the forefoot I'm not noticing any wear. So the shoe is probably going to stand up to a lot. And when I say this shoe can be used for anything, I want you to think about this shoe in terms of the Endorphin Speed 3, if you wanted to compare it to another plated shoe, or even the Brooks Hyperion Max. Now the Brooks Hyperion Max is not a plated shoe, but the ride is very similar. And if you've been following along the channel, I've mentioned the Brooks Hyperion Max a whole bunch of times. That's one of my favorite shoes of the year. So to say that the Mach X feels like the Hyperion Max is high praise for the Mach X. Look, if you are a Hoka person, then this I think is a no-brainer. This is going to be a great addition to your shoe collection. If you plan on racing in a pair of Hokas, look, there's no getting away from the Rocket X2. This thing is a rocket ship. It feels good. It feels stable. And that's where I think the Mach X is going to fit in for most people. I think it's going to be a good training partner for when you want to race in the Rocket X2. You're going to get to put the work in to this shoe. It's going to give you a little bit of propulsion, but not too much. You're still going to have to put in the effort. It's a very protective shoe and an extremely comfortable shoe. Now, I didn't talk too much about how this shoe fits around my midfoot and around my toes, but it does fit very well. I had plenty of room in the toe box, and ultimately this is just an extremely comfortable shoe to put on. But let's talk about downsides. Although when I talk about downsides of a shoe, I find it a bit tricky because shoes are made to do a certain number of things. They can't do everything. And I think if I were Hoka designing maybe version 2 of the Mach X, I'd want to try and cut the weight. And I think clearly that Hoka has left themselves some room in order to make version 2 quite a bit better, because they are going to be able to cut a little bit of weight. And while they're cutting that weight, I think maybe we could lose a little bit of this EVA and take more advantage of the PEBA foam and the attributes that PEBA foam brings to a shoe. I really think they're onto something with the Pebax plate. I think that gives something that we don't see in a lot of other plated shoes. We get some stability elements from the plate, but we don't get that obscene propulsion that we see in carbon plated shoes and even some other shoes with plastic plates. Oh, and finally, the price. $180. That's pretty steep. Pretty steep, guys. I don't know, 150, 160 at the most. I think this would be a fantastic deal. But as I said, if you're a Hoka fan, this is one you're going to want to pick up and you're not going to wait for it to go on sale. For everyone else, probably worth waiting for. I'd pick this up in a couple of months. Maybe it'll go on sale for the holiday season. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. I do have to tell you this, that I know I am going to be reaching for this shoe more than a lot of my other shoes. This shoe is crazy comfortable and it works for pretty much everything. And as most of the runs that I do in a week, much like you, are easy runs. That is mainly what I'm going to be using this shoe for. And the great thing is that I can use it for those easy runs and it feels just as comfortable as when I'm picking up the pace. So at the end of those easy runs, when it's time to drop in a few strides, it doesn't feel like I'm dragging around some clunky daily trainer. If you've run in it, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. That's it for now. My name is Matt B. This has been my review of Hoka's Mach X. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.